Hey guys, and welcome to today's video. In today's video, we are going to be going over the basics on how to work with formulas in Python. So first thing we're going to need to do is learn how to use the modules that we need for these formulas, and then hopefully turn our program into a graphical user interface program. But for this video tutorial, we're first going to learn the command line interface for this program. So firstly, we're going to import our math module by typing in from math import, just like this. And below this line, type in import math. With these two lines of code, we have started our program just like that. Now, the second thing we need to do is actually know the type of formula we need. Let's say we want to find the formula for density. So as we may know, density is equal to mass divided by volume, just like this. So firstly, as you can see through the formula, we're going to need two variables, one being the mass and the other being the volume. So to get our mass variable, we're first going to name our variable mass, set it equal to int, which stands for integer, and this int function is used to turn user input into a number. So in this int, we'll type in input, which is the function to get user input, and say mass with a question mark right there, or we can use a full colon just like that. And we'll do the same for volume and set volume to be equal to int input volume. Type it in like that and just close it up just like that. Next, we're actually going to need to find our density value by typing in density is equal to mass divided by volume, and just like that we have made our first formula solver, and we can print out our answer just like this by typing in print density. And when we run our code, we should see a prompt asking us for the mass, and I'll type in 32, and here I'll type in 2, and our answer right there is 16. But what happens when we try and use a decimal value instead of regular whole numbers? I'll type in 32.5, and as you can see, we get our error. And this is because in our function, we're using something known as an integer. And these integers only support whole numbers. And what if we wanted it to support decimals? All we need to do is type in something known as a float. So a float is basically something that can handle numbers with decimal places, while an integer cannot. But you must keep in mind that float take up more memory space than integers. So when I run our code while our variable has float instead of integer right there, we should get our identical prompt, and I'll type in 55.6 and our volume will be 2.5. And here's our answer just like this. And that's our first formula. And if you want to make it look way better, you can type in density and then add this, then a plus symbol right here. And as you can see, this is a string right here, and this is an integer. And when you're trying to print something out, you cannot print strings and integers in the same print statement. So what we're going to need to do is turn this integer right here into a string. And to turn that into a string, we have to type str, which is a function, and surround our variable inside parentheses. And now that we run our code, we'll get our identical prompt, and I'll type in our numbers. And here we have it, density and our answer. As you can see, this looks like numbers to humans, but behind the code right here is actually a string. So what if we wanted to test it with another formula? Let's say we wanted to find mass instead of density. So I'm just going to remove this right here. And as some of you may know, mass is equal to density times volume. And these are very beginner friendly formulas. So just like this, we first need our density. Our density will be equal to float, just like that, and input density, just like that. And we can close that up and do the same for volume and set volume to be equal to float input, and we'll input our volume just like that. So next we need to calculate our mass. So mass will be equal to density asterisk and then volume, which this asterisk stands for multiplication, and we can print out our mass just like that. And when we run our code, we should see mass right there. So 43 and let's say 12, and we get our mass just like this. And since we are using a float, we can also import something with decimal numbers. Now, what if you wanted to make a program that supports multiple different formulas and the user has to choose them? So the first thing you're going to need to do is create your formula functions. So firstly, let me create our density function by saying def density underscore function, just like this. And this is our density function. And I'll type in pass because I won't put code in here yet. Then I'll create our mass function by typing in mass function just like that and pass. And I'll add our final formula, which will be our volume function, just like this. So we have three formulas that the user can now choose from if they desire. So firstly, we're going to need our user input, and we'll say user input is equal to input, and in our prompt it will be what do you want to calculate, just like this. So the user is going to input what they want to calculate, and it will be stored inside of user input. So next, we need to make an if statement. If user input is equal to, let's say, density, then we'll run the density function, just like this. It's as easy as that. So if user input is equal to density, then we'll print out the density function. And we can do the same for an else if statement right here. If user input is equal to, let's say, something like mass, then we'll do the mass function, just like this. And we can make another if statement for user input if it's equal to volume, just like this. And one thing to keep in mind is that Python is a very case sensitive language. So as you can see here, we're typing everything in lowercase. So if the user was to input density with an uppercase here, it would automatically fail. And the last statement I'll add here is an else statement, which if they type something wrong, I'll say function not found, function not found. And just like this, we have our function not found. So firstly, let's start with our density function. Let's just comment the formula right here and say density is equal to mass over volume, just like that. And our mass function, and we'll say mass is equal to density times volume. And lastly, we have our volume function right here, and we'll say volume is equal to mass divided by density. And here are our three formulas. So firstly, I'm going to start with density. We're going to need our mass variable and say mass is equal to float. As you may remember, a float is basically an integer that supports a decimal value. So float, I'll type in float just like that, and then input. Then I will say mass just like this and close it up right there. Then we have our mass variable. Then volume is equal to float, just like that. Input, then I'll type in volume, just like that. And then close it up right there. So these are our two variables that we're going to need to calculate our density. And then we'll say density is equal to mass divided by volume. And just like that, we're going to print out density is equal to then plus str density, just like this. And we have created our formula, just as easy as this. So to explain this code, this is our density function right here. And as you can see, we have our mass variable, which is this mass right here, and we have our volume variable, which is this volume right here. So our density is equal to mass divided by volume. And for those of you that still don't get what float is, a float is basically an integer, but a float supports a decimal value. So as you can see here, float is basically an integer that supports a decimal value. And it is recommended to use if you're solving these kinds of formulas because most of these include a lot of decimal values. So Then we're going to print out density as a string here, plus our integer, our float right here, but turned into a string right there, and close it up. And this is our density function. And we're going to go over to math and do the same. We're going to need our density, and density will be equal to float, then input, then we'll just say density just like this, then close it up right there just like this. Then we have our density right there. Next, we're going to need our volume and set volume to be equal to float, then input, and inside of this input function we're going to say volume just like this, and then close it up right there. As easy as that. Next, we're going to need our mass variable. We just, all we have to do is type in mass and say mass is equal to density asterisk then volume, which stands for mass times volume, and there we have our mass. So density is equal to float input density, and then close it up right here. Next, we're going to need to print out our mass just like this, and type in mass just like this, and then add the plus str, then type in our variable name, which is maths, and close it up. And let's just quickly do the same for our volume function by typing in mass is equal to float, and inside this float we're going to input, and inside our input we'll type in mass just like that, and close it up right there. Then density will be equal to float input, and then inside this input we type in density just like this, and close it up. Then we need our volume to be equal to mass divided by density, and we'll print out our volume right here plus str volume just like this, and close it up. And there we have it. We have created our three function formula solver in Python. So ideally what will happen when we run our code is we'll first be greeted by this user prompt right here to input what we want to calculate, and when the user chooses one of these three right here, it will run accordingly to what they choose. And if they input something that's not available, you get the function not found. So now let's just run our code, and we can see function not found. Why is that? Ideally, this is